Welcome everyone. I'm Mark Nomad, here again at Don Odells Legends, and want to give Don props again for his tireless support of roots music. And tonight, we are honored to have as our special guest Mr. Mark Hummel.
Thank you, Mark.
And I'll be asking you all kinds of questions, Mark, but I do want to introduce Mark. To me, he is like a triumvirate of harmonica, and I'll explain what I mean by that. First of all, he's a master harmonica player. A lot of different styles and tones, great. Harmonica scholar, has studied the history of harmonica.
You can call me doctor.
But the third that just came to me today, harmonica uniter. Because this man was the originator of the harmonica blowout that he's been doing for decades now. You're into your third decade of harmonica blowouts, right, Mark?
Yeah.
And
almost.
I want to get to that. It fascinates me because harmonica was my first instrument.
Oh, okay.
But then I play mostly guitar now, but I play a lot of rack harp, and that's my excuse too. Well, it's on the rack, so it can only be so good. But it amazes me not only your facility for the instrument, but the way that you have played with arguably the best living harmonica players, and you guys, that's the uniter part. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
So we'll get to that. But first, I just found out today that you're born in New Haven, and those are old stomping grounds for me because I'm a Connecticut boy originally. We live in what we call the Happy Valley in Western Mass. But you moved to L.A. and were raised there, and then when you finished high school, you moved up to the Bay Area. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your experiences when you moved to the Bay Area, and what was it that grabbed you about blues and then harmonica specifically. So just feel free to just fill in some of these blanks.
Well, I got into harmonica really in high school, and it was really through the blues rock groups that I kind of got, into blues. It was almost really by accident in a sense. Now, one thing I had to go back to something, and that is that when I was a kid growing up, my parents actually met at Yale Divinity School.
Wow.
And then they moved immediately to Los Angeles when I was 6 months old. And my father had a church in the ghetto, in the projects, and he was in a place called Aliso Village. So as a kid, I went to church with black kids, and I went to school with Mexican American kids. So I was kind of like in a reverse sort of situation from most minorities. I was the minority,
you were the minority,
but I went to school with Mexican kids who listened to black music, and so I heard black music from the time I was born practically. I heard what was on the radio, and like our babysitters would be playing R&B on the radio, and we had a babysitter with a record player in her car that would be playing soul and Motown stuff. So, I heard a lot of, African American music from the very beginning, and it really wasn't until the Beatles came along, and then, well, I was kind of not really into the Beatles either. That's the funny part of it. It took me a while to get into that.
Yeah.
So I really got into blues through the rock groups as a teenager because, in high school, everyone was listening to, Big Brother and the Holding Company and Blue Cheer and Hendrix and Cream and all these bands. And I kept seeing Muddy Waters and Willie Dixon's name and Howlin' Wolf's name. I'd see Chester Burnett and McKinley Morganfield. I'm like, who are these guys? They write all the songs I like, of all these songs that I'm hearing. And so that's how I got hip to blues, was through the rock groups.
Well, I think a lot of us came upon it that way. My father was a harmonica player, but old school.
Right.
And we listened to Johnny Puleo and the Harmonica Cats and stuff like that. And he would play around the house. And then, so I heard a lot of music. And of course, Top 40 radio back then, in the course of an hour,
a lot different.
You would hear it was like a buffet.
Right. It really was.
And I was smitten by the Beatles, but I loved all kinds of music.
Yeah.
But then, in 1965, I heard that Paul Butterfield Blues Band first record.
Right.
And I just found out there's a movie called Horn from the Heart.
Yeah.
Now, was Butterfield an influence on you?
Butterfield was definitely an influence, because the very first guy that gave me some harmonica lessons lent me the first Paul Butterfield album, and I think maybe even the second Paul Butterfield album. And he also lent me a James Cotton album. So those three albums I was listening to a lot when I first started. And then not long after that, I went out and bought this Willie Dixon album that had Big Walter on it. I bought a John Brim Elmore James album that had Little Walter playing on it. I borrowed records from the library. At the time at the library, you could find, more real folk blues by Sonny Boy, or, real folk blues by Muddy Waters.
Yeah, there was a whole series, right?
Best of the Blues, that had juke on it, things like that. So I heard all these things really early on. And once I heard the originators, I kind of didn't listen to rock music the same way.
Well, again, going back to that British invasion period, I mean, I loved the music.
Right.
And I dug the Stones, and Brian Jones was playing harmonica and stuff. But when I heard Butterfield, I had never heard anybody play an amplified harmonica. And, unfortunately in the Northeast, there weren't a whole lot of blues that were coming up this way until the latter part of the 60s. We didn't have the benefit of the folks that grew up down south and in Chicago. They heard that. I didn't hear it. So when I first heard Butterfield playing that very heavily amplified harmonica, it blew me away. And of course he had Howlin' Wolf's rhythm section on that first record.
Right.
We
just did a date.
Changed my life.
We just did a date with Sam Lay last Tuesday. So
how'd that go?
It was fun. He gave me some. I mean, I've met Sam a few times, and he gave me some great stories about Butterfield and about Cotton and his time in those bands. So,
wow.
Yeah, I've met him a bunch of times. I've actually sat in with him a number of times, but he never remembers.
Well, I've experienced that too, but not with Sam, but with others. But I thought he was the coolest guy, and he got my mojo working on the
sings great.
The first Butterfield record, and again, you were talking about how you went back and listened to the originators. Pete Welding, who was a great jazz and blues writer back then, he wrote the liner notes for that first Butterfield record, and you read that, it was like you find out about Wolf and Muddy and the whole thing. So but then you, having moved to the Bay Area, Butterfield and Bloomfield ended up in the Bay Area. You were really you were really in kind of an epicenter of
that was
of
kind
great
of
music then.
For the West Coast, it was the place to play blues.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up in Los Angeles, I got to see a few people. Like I did see, there was a place called the Ash Grove that was really famous in L.A. and I saw Brownie and Sonny were the first guys I saw. Then I saw James Cotton. This must have been 1971, 72. And then I saw Charlie Musselwhite. So it was kind of cool because later on I got to work with all three of those guys extensively.
Yeah, it's neat how some of those guys were on some of your blowouts, which I think, is, because I've never really seen, before you started doing that, I didn't see that kind of a camaraderie or fraternity, so to speak, of harmonica
I kind of
players.
got the idea from, there was a guy that did the San Francisco Blues Festival, Tom Mazzolini. And he did something called the Battle of the Blues Harps or something like that. And he did those for about maybe 8 years or 9 years. And he kind of stopped doing his and I started doing mine. And then mine actually ended up being kind of morphing into something different because they turned into tours. Yeah. Instead of just being one date or 2 dates in a place, they ended up being a complete tour. And I would do the West Coast basically with these. Go all the way to Seattle or all the way down to San Diego or whatever. And so it became really kind of almost a touring road show, almost a mini blues festival. Well, because I would always have great guitar players. I would have a great rhythm section. I mean, I would have people like Junior Watson or, Rusty Zinn or Little Charlie and Anson, whoever. Duke Robillard I had this year. You know, I would always have at least one or two great guitar players on it, Steve Freund, and you know, then I would always try to get all the great harp players I could get, and I mean, I've pretty much had almost all of them.
You know, I think that is, I think it's a wonderful thing that you do there, Mark, because not only do you have, and we'll talk about some of your projects and your tours, but doing that for your fellow harp players.
Yeah, which they appreciated.
One thing that I found out as I you know, got older, because I've been in this business for my whole life, and I've worked for some big musical instrument companies as well.
Yeah.
The drummers get along.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And they have a whole fraternity. Of course, I always make the joke, well, yeah, usually there's only one drummer on a gig, though.
Right,
You know,
right.
There are a
That's
few
the
exceptions.
difference, yeah.
But guitar players, and you know, sometimes I find can be a little competitive.
Yeah. And harp players are competitive. Don't fool yourself.
Okay. So I was wondering about the dynamic there when
Yeah,
you're having
they
all
are
these great
competitive.
harmonica players coming in.
Yeah,
you know,
I've got some interesting stories.
I bet you do.
about those.
Probably have to share off camera, maybe, but
Yeah.
But I think it's. But again, that says a lot about you as a diplomat,
thank you.
and as someone who's comfortable in his own skin. However, I've heard you play, and you know, you got some chops, man. And,
Well, thank
you.
you.
Know, I love that thing you were doing, you know, with the Sonny Boy stuff.
Yeah.
Acoustically.
Yeah.
And then you know you do the very you know heavily amplified harp.
Yeah.
And everything
I
in
love
between.
doing both.
You got and you swing.
Yeah.
You know you've got you
Chromatic.
have.
You know,
Yeah, you got a lot of great stuff going
Well,
on.
thank
so I think that's very cool. And so you know for guys like us who love this music and have been playing it pretty much for our whole lives, the opportunity to interact with our heroes is a huge thing.
That is a huge thing.
You know,
yeah.
and it's so cool that you know James Cotton and Charlie Musselwhite, guys
Right.
who
Right.
were really on the cutting edge of
Yeah,
this
they were
thing.
really my idols when I was coming up.
Yeah, so it's so neat. I got to open for Muddy and hang with him a couple of times,
Yeah.
and John Lee Hooker and cats like
Right.
that. And you've got a very impressive list. You've toured with guys like Charles Brown, Lowell Fulsom, Jimmy Rogers, of course, who was Muddy's original other guitar player, and you know it's quite a list of folks. Did you ever? You probably didn't get a chance to hear Little Walter live, though, right?
No, he
died in
died in
68, right?
68,
Yeah.
and so you know I didn't. There were a lot of Chicago guys I never got to hear. Like I never got to hear Wolf live. I never got to hear Freddie King live. There's a number of people, but I did get to hear a lot of people at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to see Lightnin. I got to meet Jimmy Reed 3 days before he died. So, you know, there's a lot of people I got to
There's an interesting harmonica style.
Yeah.
You know, that
I
top of the
love
harp
Jimmy
thing.
Reed.
I mean, what a
Love him.
voice he had.
Yeah, he
it was very, you know.
really awesome.
You know, I've always, another thing that's occurred to me is style. To forge your own style, it's almost like you have to, and this may sound like a paradox, you have to harness your limitations to make your style. Because Jimmy Reed, nobody played like that before he did.
That's right.
And granted, a lot of the songs were a little similar. He was a
Yeah.
phenomenal songwriter, though. But he zeroed in on this thing, and it's amazing how this harmonica, this 10-hole instrument, if you're playing, you know, a Marine band or a Golden Melody or something, those are 10 holes, and then of course. I have a friend who's got some of the few left. He's got they're like $4,000.
Right.
The chordal ones and
Yeah.
the bass ones. One of them's from Johnny Puleo's band. But it's such an expressive instrument. Therapeutically, it's the only wind instrument you blow out and in.
Right.
You're not going to blow, you know, on a trumpet or a saxophone, right?
Yeah, you're not going to draw in. Yeah.
So I'm sure your respiratory system's in fine shape.
Well.
Hopefully, sounds like it is.
I had a heart attack this year or last year, so.
You never know by looking at you.
Well, thank you.
Well, music is therapy too.
Yeah.
So,
But I don't have any problem blowing.
wow.
Yeah.
That, well, you know, I mean, one could you know, theorize that if you had not been the player you are, that little bump in the road you had could have taken someone else out.
Could it be?
You know.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this Golden State Lone Star tour.
That's for 5 years we've been doing that.
Yeah. Would you care to
Well, it was something that I kind of got the idea from playing with the rhythm section, the guys I'm playing with tonight, RW and Wes, because they've known each other since they were kids. They were playing together in high school, and so RW has been my bass player for over 10 years, and he mentioned to me about 6 years ago, he goes, Wes would love to do some gigs with us. So we started doing some tours with Wes Starr on drums and RW on bass, and from there I kind of, at that point I was already playing a little bit with Little Charlie on guitar, and so I asked Wes, I said, do you think Anson would be interested in maybe doing some gigs with all of us, and we could do it kind of as a special all-star band.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we started doing in 2012 in October. And so this will be 5 years that we've had the band together. Unfortunately, Anson's not here tonight, and Little Charlie left back in December. And so we got Mike Keller on board back in March, who's a great guitar player, and him and Anson are really simpatico. So
I look forward to hearing him.
Yeah.
One fellow, who, doing my research today, I had a pleasant surprise. I just got a real kick out of him. It's Kyle Jester. Is that it?
Yeah.
He had this very tasty approach, and when you were doing the Creeper, which is a must listen, folks, really beautiful version, and I just really dug his approach, and he reminds me actually of another friend of mine who's a great guitar player. So I had never heard his name before. So there's so much talent out there.
There is so much talent in the Bay Area.
Yes.
There's so many great guys. I work with Rusty Zinn a lot on guitar.
His name I'm familiar with.
Also a guy named Bob Welsh who plays with Elvin Bishop. I work with him quite a bit out there. So, and there's a lot of good guys to choose from in the Bay Area. June Core, who plays with Muscle White, he does a lot of gigs with me when we're home. So this is more of a road gig that we do with the Golden State because, 3 of the guys live in Texas and me and RW live in California. So when I'm doing gigs at home, it's almost always with, Rusty or Bob and RW and whoever's playing drums. Well, then I'm also starting a new project too. I'm starting a thing called Deep Basement Shakers. That is, there's some guys that have had a group together for a couple of years. They're just a duo, and I joined up with them. So now it's kind of a jug band type situation where the guy plays rub board, one of the guys plays rub board, the other guy plays piano and guitar, and it's really more acoustic stuff like Bluebird type stuff. That we do, and that's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. In fact, I find, Mark, that for me to be balanced as an artist, I have half of my gigs are electric and half of my gigs are acoustic, and I love doing that. I feel bad for people that only dwell in one area because there's so many other things that come out. And that old thing sometimes less is more. When
there's a lot of different nuance when you play acoustic.
Yeah, very much so. So another thing I found out is that you write a bit, and a couple of things I wanted to ask you was, you wrote a book called Big Road Blues, and you've had some heavy people say, hey, if you're a blues musician or any musician on the road, you should be reading this book as almost a primer or a guide. And
my favorite was Nick Gravenitis, who said, he goes, it's a great bathroom read. Chapters are short.
Well, that is that even more reason to read the book. And I know Huey Lewis gave you a great compliment, and then
great quote.
I love what Charlie Musselwhite said.
Had a
I'm sure he was teasing you a little bit too, but not as bad as I thought. That's great, man. And now, do you have any other writing projects?
Eventually I'll write a second one.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to have enough stories stored up from the last, 6, 7 years even, Had a lot of stuff go on, so.
Well, you've got a lot of records out as a leader. But a record that came out not too long ago was your tribute to Little Walter.
Yeah,
and again, you brought in a lot of heavy players, and you produced that. So could you share?
Well, that was a real rewarding experience, not just for the. I actually have a great story about just the recording of it, because when we recorded it in San Diego at a club. And we did the first set, and the first set felt really good, and and we were only doing like 2 shows that night. So we did the first set, and at the very end of the first set, one of the guys that was doing the monitor accidentally kicked out the plug and
Ouch.
erased the entire recording from the first set.
Oh, so he did it right at the beginning of the first?
He did it at the end of the first set.
Oh my goodness.
So the entire first set got erased.
Oh my goodness.
Off the hard drive. And so fortunately we did the second set and were able to get enough good material on the second set that we were able to make a record out of it. But it was one of those things that was pretty hairy.
That could be very stressful. But you when you read about the lore of any art, you find out that a lot of times it's not really
seat
smooth.
of the pants.
You really and it
but
lends
getting
itself.
nominated for a Grammy was a real thrill, and
that's great.
That was pretty big,
You've won and have been nominated for the Blues Music Awards.
We won 2 on that one.
Congratulations.
Which was pretty amazing because it was against Buddy Guy and Susan Tedeschi.
Wow. Yeah.
Some heavy hitters.
Those are heavy hitters. I know Susan from her Boston days.
Right.
And Buddy, I wrote his. I mentioned earlier off camera that I had done the writings or maybe it was on camera, senioritis. But Buddy, I wrote his little biography as well. And Buddy, of course, influenced so many. Hendrix.
Yeah.
But then I found out in doing Guitar Slim's bio that he was a huge influence on Buddy.
Oh yeah.
And it's really interesting. No matter how far back you go, you find out that somebody was just knocked out by someone else, and then they took from that and added to their thing.
For me, I find that kind of thing really interesting. For me, that's like, what I really enjoy about the blues and jazz is going back and finding who influenced who as far back as possible to find out who,
And sometimes it's amazing.
I think I've got a musicologist in me somewhere.
Well, that's the scholar part that I was mentioning of your
yeah.
triumvirate. The
I
scholar.
think so,
a lot of times scholars don't play, and a lot of times players are not scholars, but you do that.
Yeah.
And
well, I've found that that's a really interesting thing. I like playing detective when it comes to music.
I've done that in my writings,
history.
and it's interesting. Robert Johnson.
Yeah.
Kokomo Arnold was a huge influence. Skip James and Son House.
Yeah.
He kind
a
of
lot of guys that
synthesized
don't
those.
really get. A lot of times, people that didn't really get credited. Lonnie Johnson. A lot of people that go way back.
Oh yeah.
That's why I'm so into the pre-war stuff now.
Yeah.
I find that really an interesting time.
A lot of stuff was around way before we knew it was around.
That's right.
There was rock and roll in the 40s. Really, what was coming out of the Sun Studios in Memphis was really kind of done for 10 years already by the time. But it's been a pleasure to speak with you, and I'm looking very forward to hearing your band tonight. And you want to just tell us what's next on the horizon for Mark Hummel and your either your blowouts or you got three projects going.
Right now, the thing I'm looking forward to in January is we're doing a West Coast blues harmonica blowout that's going to be centered around Chicago blues. And I've got a hell of a lineup for that. I'm really excited about the lineup. I kind of wanted to do something that was not as much the harmonica players fronting it, but actual singers and guitar players. Like we got Dietra Farr, who's a female blues singer from Chicago, singing, and have harmonica played behind her. She's a harmonica freak. Billy Boy Arnold, who is a harmonica player.
I meant to. I wrote it down, but I forgot to mention. That guy, played with Bo Diddley, and then he wrote a couple of classics.
Bo Diddley.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that.
Wish You Would.
Yeah.
And amongst other things, Ain't Got You, right?
Ain't Got You we're going to do tonight.
This Billy Boy Arnold is a legend.
Yeah, we just played with him last Tuesday and Wednesday as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And Corky Siegel was on those shows as well.
Yes.
So, yeah, you know, somebody like Billy Boy is somebody that I've really tried to push out there in terms of getting people to be aware of just his history. And I mean, because, you know, he's got just this Zelig kind of history. I mean, he took lessons from the first Sonny Boy when he was 12. He named, you know, Bo Diddley and helped create that sound that Bo Diddley had. You know, he's still to me, he's one of the heaviest guys that can do the pre-war style blues. I mean, the Big Bill Brunzi album he did was just an amazing record. There's nobody else that sings that style like Big Bill or Sonny Boy, quite like, or Walter Davis. I mean, he's done all three of those guys, you know, tribute albums.
I always wondered, has he given you any insight, Billy Boy?
Yeah.
On the fact that I think I'm a Man by Bo Diddley came out, but right after that, Mannish Boy by Muddy came out.
Yeah, you know, I never asked Billy about that. I'm
I was wondering
I never did.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, I guess I just figured, well, I know that, you know, Muddy took it from Bo Diddley's.
I thought that was the case.
I mean, I think what Billy Boy might have told me a long time ago was that, you know, it was kind of like, I'm a Man was really kind of like the, what do they call that? I'm having a senior moment.
That's all
where
right.
they talk about, you know, like the Dozens.
Oh, yeah,
it was
the Dozens,
kind of like
right.
the Dozens.
Yeah,
where, you know, you kind of make
Trading
up
barbs,
rhymes.
yeah.
You're making up rhymes.
Yeah.
And I think Bo Diddley did a lot of that anyway.
Yeah.
If you listen to things like Say Man, that's totally the Dozens, you know.
Yeah.
But basically, Billy Boy is one of those guys. He's got perfect recall about any historical stuff. If you say, well, you know, tell me where Silvio's was, he'll name you the address. He'll practically give you the phone number.
He's 80 plus?
He's like 83.
Wow. And he's Jerome Arnold's big brother, right?
Right.
Jerome Arnold
Exactly.
playing bass for Wolf
with
Sam Lay, and then Paul Butterfield kind of snaked them out of that band into his band, and then they backed up Dylan at the 65 Folk Festival, the first time Dylan plugged in.
Right.
So I mean, you know, so
and
the Arnold family has been,
was part of it.
Yeah, and Jerome played. I mean, that's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And
it was a kick sitting in the back room with both Sam and Billy Boy, listening to them go back and forth about names. I mean, I love being kind of the fly on the wall in those situations because you hear these guys and they'll come up with all these people you've never heard of. And I find that fascinating.
It is
fascinating.
fascinating.
I had the same thing with like Snooky Pryor and Sam Myers. You know, the time I brought Anson and Sam out and we were riding around and both me and Anson were listening to these guys trading stories about all these names that I'd never heard of.
Wow.
You know, like from Chicago, guys that never recorded.
Right.
They just happen to be guys on the scene that you'd never hear about.
Right.
And I mean, I'm pretty hip to who a lot of the obscure guys are, but most of the obscure guys I know are guys that all recorded.
Right.
So there's very few that didn't record that you hear about.
Well, there's so much talent out there, and of course, a lot of folks never really get the notoriety. But you know, thank you for
But let me
carrying
finish
the torch.
who else.
Oh,
let me finish
please.
who else is on this show.
Oh yeah,
because I got John Primer on it, who's the guy that was the last guitar player in Muddy's band. I've got a guy named Oscar Wilson, who is the Cashbox Kings vocalist, who's just a tremendous vocalist from the South Side originally. I've got Billy Flynn, who's the guitar player that played he played all the music in Cadillac Records along with Kim Wilson and Larry Taylor and all these guys. He played on At Last when that won the Grammy. I've got a guy named R.J. Michaud playing harmonica on the show as well. So I've got a really tremendous lineup for this Chicago Blues one.
Well, you know, thank you for, you know, not only as an artist, I mean, you work hard enough with your other projects.
Can't leave anybody out.
But the fact that this is the uniter part of the triumvirate again, you know. He's a master player, scholar, and possibly the most important thing in terms of just humanity, the love and uniting all those players.
Well, I want to see people like this get out there. For me, a lot of it is, it's not about me as much as it's about doing something for the scene and keeping this music in front of the public, because unfortunately what's happened, I've found that the festivals and stuff like that, a lot of times it ends up being this whatever's going to bring in the dollar ends up being what it determines the lineup of a festival. And I really want to see some of the people that are still out there that are, seniors that helped create this music, like Billy Boy or Lazy Lester, or, when James Cotton was around, Joe Beard, who's another great guy that lives in Rochester, New York. There's just all these guys that are still around that are not getting any, they're not getting the kind of love and respect they deserve,
Well, thank you for doing that, Mark, and it was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you,
And
Mark.
you folks are in for treats, and keep on keeping on, man.
Well, thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.